Hong Kong erupted into protest on Sunday in the wake of a new law. Many fear an end to freedom and takeover by the Chinese regime. Beijing is vowing to push ahead the controversial law that could end Hong Kong's autonomy. The White House says it could lead to sanctions and the city's special status could be at stake. Officials continue to downplay the severity of the outbreak in China's northeastern Jilin province, but an internal CDC report gives a different story. In an exclusive interview, a widow in Wuhan tells us her heart-wrenching story of how the CCP's cover-up of the virus in early January led to her husband's death. And a Harvard professor speaks out after being misrepresented by Chinese state media on the origin of the virus. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Hong Kongers taking to the streets over the weekend. Police and protesters clashed again as a sweeping and oppressive new law that China's proposing received international condemnation.
The air in Hong Kong filled with noise and tear gas again on Sunday. Thousands returned to the streets in a scene reminiscent of last year's mass protests. It's the first large-scale outpouring of opposition to Beijing's proposed law, named the National Security Law. Hong Kong police said at least 180 protesters had been arrested as of 10 p.m. Sunday.
The national security law, I think, is no different from Article 23. The Communist Party of China is restricting our freedom. One country, two systems should be Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong.
The details of the law announced Friday met with international criticism that it would undermine Hong Kong's autonomy and freedoms. Freedoms promised by the Chinese regime after the city was handed over from Britain to China in 1997. The premise was to maintain a separate system of law for Hong Kong from China.
The national security law is undoubtedly turning Hong Kong's one country, two systems into one country, one system, a complete liquidation and a chilling effect. When the regime announced the death penalty under one country, two systems so that one country, one system could be implemented in Hong Kong people would certainly fight back.
In the meantime, the people of Hong Kong are looking to plan a series of new protests.
Beijing could pass the new law in Hong Kong in a matter of days. The plans are widely criticized across the world. Our UK correspondent Neil Woodrow has the story.
Hong Kong was handed over from the UK to Chinese rule in 1997 under a promise of democracy and semi-autonomy, including an independent judiciary, not enjoyed in mainland China. But Beijing has increasingly infringed on those freedoms. Simon Chung, a former employee of the British consulate in Hong Kong, was tortured and detained for 15 days after being taken to mainland China in August last year. Simon, now in exile in London, said the new law is much worse than the bill that triggered last year's mass protests.
It would have allowed for the extradition of suspects to mainland China, where they can face rights abuse by the authoritarian government. But now the new national security law will simply bring the Chinese draconian law to Hong Kong.
One part of the new law intends to set up institutions in Hong Kong responsible for defending national security. Simon said Hong Kong is falling under the command of the Chinese regime, and it wouldn't stop there.
If the international society, including ourselves, just do nothing to help Hong Kong, and then will let this totalitarianism to overspill to Taiwan, to South China Sea, and to Asia, and gradually will come to the UK and to the United States.
The UK government said it was deeply concerned about the proposed law in a joint statement with Canada and Australia. But former member of the European Parliament Julie Ward said this isn't enough. She would like to see the UK use trade with China as leverage for human rights.
We want to make sure that that we might be able to improve the human rights situations in other countries by our buying power, by our trading power.
Former Governor of Hong Kong Lord Patten and former UK Foreign Secretary Sir Malcolm Rifkind, leading a group of 210 lawmakers from 23 countries, issued a statement on Saturday. It read, "If the international community cannot trust Beijing to keep its word when it comes to Hong Kong, people will be reluctant to take its word on other matters. This flagrant breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration cannot be tolerated."
While China vows to push the controversial law through, the city's special status could be at stake. If passed, many worry Beijing could use it to further persecute human rights activists and religious minorities.
A top Chinese politician confirmed that the regime continues pushing its so-called national security law for Hong Kong. He said that after thinking it over, China's National People's Congress has decided to submit the draft law for review.
We are convinced that with our joint efforts, we can successfully complete the legislation.
Beijing is pushing to pass it this Thursday, bypassing Hong Kong's legislature. Many fear the law could be the death knell for Hong Kong's freedom. The proposed law bans treason, sedition, subversion, and foreign interference. Beijing has a record of using these charges to persecute human rights activists and religious minorities. In Beijing's eyes, having the right to assemble and protest could be seen as subversion. Lobbying foreign governments for democracy causes could be seen as collusion with foreign forces, and criticizing the Chinese regime could be interpreted as sedition. Controversy erupted after Beijing proposed the law last week. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said if Hong Kong can't retain a high degree of autonomy, the U.S. could revoke the city's special trade status. He said, "It's hard to see how Hong Kong could remain the Asian financial center it has become if China takes over." The Chinese regime responded to O'Brien's remarks, saying it will fight back if the U.S. imposes sanctions. If the law is passed, Taiwan could also revoke the special status it extends to Hong Kong. Compared to people from mainland China, the special status makes it much easier for Hong Kongers to visit, invest in, and immigrate to Taiwan. Taiwan's president said if the situation changes in Hong Kong, the act that establishes those rules could be revoked. She added that Taiwan is committed to stepping up its rescue efforts and will provide the people of Hong Kong with necessary assistance. Taiwan doesn't have a refugee law, but it does have a law that requires its government to provide assistance to Hong Kong or Macau residents whose safety and liberty are immediately threatened for political reasons. Despite rising tensions between Washington and Beijing over the proposal, the U.S. dollar remained steady near a one-week high at 99.74.
The new law could be implemented within months. What is China trying to achieve, and why now? We talked with a China observer about why the effects of this will be felt far beyond the borders of Hong Kong.
Hong Kongers worry the arbitrary detention common in mainland China will soon become the new norm in Hong Kong.
Our biggest fear right now is Chinese government, or in fact, the Hong Kong government will use this new law in the name of national security to crack down on the opposition or any members in the society who they do not like.
Protests have resumed on the streets of Hong Kong. The U.S. has signaled it would sanction Chinese officials who help enforce the new law. Why is Beijing pushing the law at great risk of international backlash when it's already facing enormous international pressure for its handling of the virus? Qin Peng, a China affairs analyst and former corporate consultant in China, says it's because the communist regime's survival is on the line.
China's communist regime is facing enormous pressure both from the inside and the outside. The international community is trying to hold China accountable for the virus. On the inside, Chinese people are also demanding accountability, and the voices demanding freedom are rising. Its economy is going down, large numbers of companies could go bankrupt, and unemployment is going to rise. In this regard, there is a good chance of a civil uprising occurring in China.
He said in times like this, the most important thing for the CCP is to suppress any dissident voices, lest those voices inspire people to demand more freedom in mainland China, and that Hong Kong has become the elephant in the room. The Chinese regime has always seen Hong Kong as a base camp for pro-democracy, anti-communist activities. Every year, Hong Kong holds the world's biggest gathering commemorating the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, the Chinese Communist Party's bloody crackdown on pro-democracy students. Religious minorities like Falun Gong that are persecuted in China continue to be active in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is also vocal in advocating for China's prisoners of conscience and human rights lawyers.
Right across the river from mainland China, there is a place that's in some ways independent and free and cannot be completely controlled by the regime. This is just a thorn in the side for the CCP. Because in the eyes of the CCP, national security means the security of the CCP, of the Chinese Communist Party. It's not the security of the Chinese people or the security of China as a country.
China's communist leader recently stressed that China needs to ensure stability in 6 areas, including basic living needs and food and energy security. Qin said the economic and trade slide in China has made Hong Kong less important for the CCP as a trade hub, but more a threat that triggers bigger change in China.
The CCP is basically giving up Hong Kong. It is allowing Hong Kong to be crushed, and then it can turn around and say to the people of Hong Kong, look, this is all because of your protests. It is all because of the U.S. sanctions that Hong Kong suffers. It can use this as propaganda.
Qin said the international community has not yet held China accountable in any significant way, even after years of Hong Kong's freedom being eroded by the CCP. But the stakes might be higher for the world this time.
Because in the past, protecting Hong Kong was just about Hong Kong and Americans' interests in Hong Kong. But right now, the meaning of Hong Kong has been raised to another level. People have realized that if the Chinese Communist Party gets its way in Hong Kong, then in the future, its hand will reach the entire world.
Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Now to China. Jilin Province's Health Commission reported only 1 new local case on May 13th. But a Jilin CDC report we got shows there was at least a second confirmed case on that day. And this case might be very important. This person sold corn at a market and had contact with many people. But it was covered up so people couldn't be notified. They did this to show that everything is under control. Chinese state media Qiu Shi recently published an article titled How Scientists Perceive the Ins and Outs of the Novel Coronavirus. The long article quotes several Western scientists, but many are quoted out of context or misrepresented. Qiu Shi quoted an April CNN interview with Dr. Ashish Jha, director of the Harvard Global Health Institute. He said the virus could have been spreading in the U.S. as early as January. The Qiu Shi article attempts to use his words to prove the virus didn't originate in China. But in an interview with VOA, Professor Jha rebuked the claim. He never doubted the new coronavirus originated from Wuhan. He said the virus may have arrived in the States at the beginning of the year, meaning the virus could have been spreading in China as early as mid-November. He reiterated in his mind the origin is unquestionable. Everything shows the virus is from China and Wuhan. 5 firms were delisted from the Chinese stock exchange in May. They were forced to delist because their share price would have fallen below 14 cents for 20 straight days. It's the first time in history that 5 A-class companies have been delisted in 1 month. A report says financial loss and fraud caused the prices to fall. That means a total of 6 Chinese firms were moved from A-share markets so far this year. Another 9 are currently on the brink of delisting. There are now 62 Chinese firms listed with a stock price lower than 21 cents. The impact of CCP virus is beginning to show in the stock market. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to influence Hong Kong's education system. Recent notices from several cities and provinces say the Ministry of Education wants to send more teachers from the mainland to Hong Kong and Macau. They'll include high school, elementary school, and kindergarten teachers. All must be firm in political views and be a member of the Chinese Communist Party. The exchange program was first introduced in 2005. In February, the U.S. government designated 5 Chinese media in the U.S. as foreign missions. It means these organizations are directly controlled by the CCP and are trying to influence U.S. public opinion. Not only Chinese media operating in the U.S. that are repeating CCP propaganda. Many Chinese-language media founded in the U.S. are also doing it. The Xingdao Daily, one of the biggest Chinese-language newspapers in the U.S., is using the CCP's narrative in its Hong Kong reporting. On May 22nd, the front page headline reads, "The Standing Committee of the Chinese National People's Congress is taking action and will enact the Hong Kong National Security Law." It used a photo from the opening ceremony of the political event, 2 sessions in Beijing. It looks just like People's Daily, the CCP's mouthpiece. It used the same photo that day. The Chinese regime is trying to introduce the so-called national security law and restrict Hong Kong people's freedom. This triggered massive protests in Hong Kong. But one article on Xingdao Daily said only the national security law can suppress the unrest in Hong Kong. It said national security law is a better and more effective way. The U.S., Taiwan, and other democratic countries have backed Hong Kong. They've told the Chinese regime to keep its promise and allow Hong Kong its autonomy for 50 years. The article on Xingdao Daily described the international support as intervention in Hong Kong's politics, adding these countries have sent people to Hong Kong to intervene without presenting any evidence. Last year, Hong Kong's pro-democratic candidates achieved the biggest landslide victory on record, gaining control of 17 of the 18 district councils. The Xingdao Daily article said, however, the pro-democratic camp, quote, has made plans to seize power in an attempt to gain legislative power and paralyze the operation of government. The owner of Xingdao Daily is a pro-Beijing businessman from Hong Kong, a member of the Chinese Political Consultative Conference. In an exclusive interview, a widow in Wuhan described how the CCP's cover-up of the virus in early January caused insufficient medical treatment of her late husband. Now, without him, she lives, quote, a life worse than death. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
Ms. Wang, a Wuhan resident, said her husband first developed a fever on January 12. They went to the hospital the next day, but they were told the disease wasn't infectious and that there was no need to transfer him to the Department of Infectious Diseases.
When he started to show symptoms, we did not know it was this particular kind of disease at all. Everything was covered up and muffled. We knew nothing.
On January 11th, the day before Wang's husband fell sick, China reported the first known death from an illness caused by the virus. The same day, Wuhan health authorities claimed there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. It wasn't until more than a week later, on January 20th, that a medical expert officially admitted that the virus can spread from person to person.
He was really sick and his high fever went on for days, but the hospital said it can be prevented and controlled.
Wang said the hospital quickly transferred her husband to the Department of Infectious Diseases after his condition deteriorated, but doctors didn't reveal what kind of disease had sickened him. Throughout his hospitalization, the hospital also refused to say whether her husband had tested positive for the virus.
We family members were not informed of the result from his PCR test. The hospital didn't allow us to see it. They refused to give us the answer, even though we asked.
The condition of Wang's husband continued to deteriorate until he died on February 6, less than a month after falling ill. He left behind Wang, their elderly parents, and their middle school-aged son. Wang said the term coronavirus was mentioned on her husband's death notice.
Every single day, tears would run down my face. I was suffering so much. During that time, I felt such despair and fear. I was really mentally and physically devastated. After my husband had passed, even today, I still can't sleep at night. I just can't fall asleep.
Wang only learned of her husband's death after receiving a phone call during her mandatory quarantine. She wasn't even allowed to leave quarantine to see his body.
I couldn't even attend my husband's funeral. I was really crushed. I called the authorities in my area, crying and begging, but they still refused to let me go.
Wang's son didn't know about his father's death until he saw the ashes that were brought home. Wang also didn't dare to tell her husband's elderly mother about his passing until after the burial. She feared that his mom would have a fatal heart attack when she found out. Wang said if she had known how severe the situation was earlier, she wouldn't have let her husband stay at the hospital. That way, they could have avoided the ineffective treatments. She says they may have even caused her husband's health to deteriorate and ultimately led to his death.
When things like this happen to a family, the entire family is ruined. Now I don't have any hope and I don't have any way out.
Wang, who has been laid off since 2002 and is now widowed, didn't get any relief money from the government, except for $420 when her husband's body was buried. She explained that now she's having a very hard time raising her young son. She's also struggling to afford medicine for herself, as her lungs are also infected.
Maybe it would even have been better if I had passed away with my husband back then. Then it'd be all over. I now live a life worse than death. President Trump is threatening to move August's Republican National Convention away from North Carolina. He wants the state's Democratic governor to guarantee full attendance in the arena. The CCP virus pandemic has forced President Trump and presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden to hold campaign rallies. Some have raised concerns that a formal nominating convention packed with delegates could be risky. But if full attendance can't be guaranteed, the president says the Republican Party will reluctantly find another site, with all of the jobs and economic development it brings. He added it's not something he wants to do. A White House economic advisor says the unemployment rate in America could reach 20%, but may get back to single digits again by the beginning of next year. It was at 3.5% in February before skyrocketing to 14.7% in April.
White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett said high unemployment rates triggered by the virus pandemic could stay in the double digits until election in November. He said there was an error in earlier data.
It's going to be quite a bit higher, and you know, there were some technical things they kind of messed up, and on an economics lecture we'd go into them, but it could be if they fix the numbers and fix the thing that they mischaracterized last time, that you'll end up with a number north of 20% in May.
He added that the number might not drop to single digits until the end of the year. Hassett said he'd become more optimistic about falling unemployment rates should a vaccine for the CCP virus become available in July. Nearly 40 million Americans have filed for unemployment claims in the past 2 months or so, triggered by business closures. Dozens of states have seen record high unemployment numbers. Hassett said that even though the economic shock was unprecedented, so was the policy response to alleviate it.
The White House has barred entry of non-U.S. citizens traveling from Brazil. The country has become a CCP virus hotspot in recent weeks. It added 15,000 new cases on Sunday, bringing its total to over 350,000.
The U.S. Embassy in Brasilia said in a statement the new restrictions would come into force on May 28th. It prohibits most non-U.S. citizens from traveling to the United States if they have been in Brazil in the last 2 weeks. Green card holders, close relatives of U.S. citizens, and flight crew members, among select others, would be exempt. President Trump said previously that it would be implemented if necessary to protect the country from infections coming in. Brazil's health ministry raised its tally of confirmed cases by over 15,000 on Sunday, to some 363,000 cases and over 22,000 deaths. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said that the White House will evaluate other nations in South America to determine if more countries should be added to the list. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany said the restrictions won't affect trade between the U.S. and Brazil.
A small furry mink is believed to have infected a human with the CCP virus in the Netherlands. Today, the Dutch government found what it believes to be the second case of mink-to-human transmission. Last week, the Dutch government reported its first suspected case of human CCP virus infection from a mink. On April 26th, the government reported mink on a farm in the south of the country had been found to have the disease, prompting a wider investigation of such farms where mink are bred for their fur. The minister says that the country's National Institute for Health believes the risk of animal-to-human transmission is negligible outside of these farms. A new effort to entice diners to return to restaurants. A French designer has developed an oversized lampshade made of transparent plastic that encases a customer's head.
Could this be how a restaurant table for one looks in the near future? French designer Christophe Guignon says his oversized lampshade of transparent plastic will keep diners safe. And unlike some other designs on the market, he reckons they look pretty chic too.
Some of the designs I've seen look like we're in prison, and it doesn't tempt me to go and eat in a prison visiting room. I said to myself, maybe we can make it more glamorous, prettier, more poetic.
The design will go into production within days, and Guignon says he's received interest from as far afield as Canada, Japan and Argentina. France has begun to relax some of its lockdown restrictions, but the government is yet to green-light the reopening of all restaurants and bars because of the problems they pose for disease control.
In California, one restaurant is taking a big step on the path to normalcy. It's the first in San Francisco's Bay Area to resume in-dining service. The restaurant's owner says they are fully booked.
Over the weekend, Tarla Mediterranean Bar and Grill went from takeout boxes to plates. It's the first restaurant in the San Francisco Bay Area to reopen its doors for in-house dining. Yusuf, the restaurant's owner, says they are getting pretty busy.
We are completely booked, and we are very excited to open again and so serve our customers. We are looking forward.
Tarla, which has been operating for 9 years, is offering full service and its complete menu to incoming customers. But reopening doesn't come without restrictions. Certain guidelines for dine-in restaurants include keeping tables 6 feet apart, taking customers' temperatures, and using disposable menu sheets. And perhaps the worst news for customers is that the restaurant's seating capacity has been cut to half.
Crazy number of people are calling and they want to make a reservation, they want to come and dine with us. But unfortunately, we are running with a 50% capacity. Since we are running 50% capacity, we can accommodate so much.
Regardless, Tarla can now serve its customers in person, which they say brings great joy.
I mean, that's why we do it, is to feed the people and just to get the reaction of nourishment and good food and hospitality.
Yusuf hopes Talpa can keep its doors open to the public and that things get back to normal. Reporting by Eileen Ang, NTD News.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.